Welcome back, beautiful and amazing human beings. I have not been around for the last few days, and I apologize. It's almost the equivalent of a couple years in internet time, but that's because I've been here in Poland, where of course I've been spending a lot of time with family, eating a lot of pierogies, acting like a farmer, eating a lot of weird, fermented, colorful food, spending time, of course, with family here in Poland, specifically Gdańsk, or Danzig, or as previously known as the Free City, the Free State of Danzig. Interestingly enough, this specific territory where my lineage, my heritage comes from, historically has been on and off autonomous, stateless, governmentless throughout many periods in history. Important history that the Soviet Union Communist Empire tried to destroy. In many ways, they were very successful in destroying a lot of the historical record because they saw that record as a threat to their occupation of this region. And that's why in this video, I want to make a specific video about how people in this specific region created a movement that ultimately brought down the Soviet Communist Empire. Now today, we are at the Solidarność Museum. Now if you don't know what that means, which obviously you probably don't, it was one of the central movements that actually took down communism in Europe. So I think it would be interesting to kind of highlight some of the things here. A lot of things here are centered around the shipyard, which was one of the largest shipyards in the world that organized a strike which started the major kind of protest movement in Poland. And most importantly, it was a non-violent, democratic movement of the people and workers in this country. Now obviously, being Polish myself, being born in this specific area, formerly known as the Free State of Danzig, my family did participate in this protest and was a part of it. They even told me stories how like Lech Wałęsa was patting me on the head when I was a little baby when they were at the rallies. So obviously this is something that is important to me. So the major protests and strikes happened in the city of Gdańsk, or Danzig, and then spread all throughout Poland, making it a very big national event that couldn't be ignored. So this is actually the list of demands that were made by the strikers. There were 21 demands. The first ones were talking about the freedom of speech and the freedom of press, which of course was censored and denied to a lot of people here. That definitely leaves a lot to think about, especially in our modern day where the talk of censorship is so different, and how it was such a priority for the movement here. A little freedom speech cell, as they would call it here. If you said anything the authorities didn't like, they would put you in these free speech pins. So this is an example of a free government apartment that you would get that really wasn't free, because if you would criticize the government, you wouldn't get an apartment like this in Poland. And of course, to maintain order, people were shot and killed, arrested, detained, interrogated, and tortured in jail, including my uncle. All, of course, very dangerous thought criminals. And then they have really graphic photos here, which you could uncover to see some of the brutality, but yeah, can't really show that. And of course, what's communism without bread lines? Very similar lines, of course, that I've seen in Zimbabwe and Venezuela for basic common goods, which surprisingly weren't available. Now, another interesting fact about the list of demands here is that it wanted to avoid radical language in order to try to galvanize as many people as possible to be a part of this kind of larger strike movement that started this bigger protest. These are also some flyers. My family was also a part of making some of these, and if you got caught with them, you would end up in very serious trouble. And the lightest sentence was jail for a couple years just for possessing a piece of paper talking about freedom. And then people were like, hey, this idea of freedom, that's pretty cool. And then they started making music, plays, and shows about it. And then the government, after clearly losing the culture war, decided to declare martial law. And then the buttholes set up freedom checks, or checkpoints as they were originally called, put the military and the police with tanks on the streets all throughout Poland, while establishing internment camps all throughout the country and capturing, torturing a lot of the political leadership, a part of the freedom movement. The government even played a voice recording of someone saying that all conversations on the telephone would be recorded. There was a lot of random street searches, ID checks, and of course a curfew from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. where you couldn't leave unless you were a commie. There was also a very interesting protest made against the mainstream media. Whenever the news would be on, protesters would organize national walks during, of course, the time that the news was on all the televisions, since the news was propaganda at the time. It's almost like we're watching the Yellow Vests, or scenes from Hong Kong. And then the protests never ended, so the government actually established a roundtable meeting to resolve the differences between both sides and in their attempt to end the strikes that were happening and crippling the country. The government then agreed to hold elections, which were held on June 4th, 1989. And of course, this famous Western picture of a cowboy holding, instead of a revolver, a sign that said vote, came out and inspired all these candidates to run against the commies. And the commies were surprised on election day. Now, of course, since Poland fell from the sphere of communism, so did all the other proxy states of the failing Soviet Empire. This, of course, inspired more people to be like, hey, too much government is not a good idea. And then, of course, you have your generic tributes to Gandhi, MLK, and, the basic stuff here, which has nothing to do with the fall of communism, but still it's here. I found this museum kind of simplistic because, knowing the history from my family, it is a lot more complicated than just the kind of black and white situation that they portrayed here in this museum. It is pretty funny how the gift shop has things made in communist China. Oh, goodness. Now, was it this single strike? Was it this single protest that brought down communism? Well, of course not. It was protests that happened beforehand that inspired it. It was the inspirations of other protests that happened after it that created a movement. And one of the conditions, with of course many other conditions, that being Chernobyl, that being the Afghanistan war, that being overbloated government spending, the crush of innovation in the Russian state with government control of your life, that ultimately created the fall of the Soviet Empire and this kind of larger idea of communism all throughout Europe. Now, depending on who you ask, people are going to have different versions of events, of exactly what happened and what caused it. And I think it's always important to question every aspect of every story. There's even contentious viewpoints about the history of Danzig that I talked about earlier in this video, with, of course, the German historians and Polish historians seeing things a lot differently depending on their perspective. That's why it's important to always look at both sides of the stories, which sadly this kind of museum really didn't do. There, of course, is the larger topic of U.S. covert operations that I think should be discussed, but wasn't. There, of course, are accusations against Lech Wałęsa, the guy who patted me on the head when I was a little child, about him allegedly cooperating with the communists. He's, of course, denying all those allegations. But again, the conversation always needs to be open in order to kind of progress forward. And this is why I kind of wanted to leave this video on a bigger question for you, is because at the museum, there's also Coca-Cola being sold with the Polish words on them saying, taste freedom. And if you've been watching this channel, if you're just a little bit open-minded, when you're drinking Coca-Cola, you're not really tasting freedom. You're most likely, if you're in the United States especially, tasting government subsidized high fructose corn syrup. And of course, for legal purposes, a drink that many people have concerns about. I think I could legally say that. But it brings me to this kind of bigger point here, is that are we at a point in time in history right now where we're doing better than ever? Has this movement succeeded? Have we gone towards a better place? Or are we returning to, of course, the same place where we came from, where the government has control of the private sector and control of information, with, of course, the censorship that is happening all throughout the internet? What do you think? Where are we at? Do we need another Solidarność? Do we need another movement? Are we coming back to the place that Europe, that specifically Poland, was in before? Let me know in the comment section below. I hope you guys are enjoying this videos. I'm trying to do something new. I took some time off. There's a little doggo here following me. Come here, puppy. Oh, it's a cute little doggo. But anyway, regardless of that, if you like this video, share it, because Google won't. And stay tuned. I'm going to be experimenting with a lot of other different video styles, a lot of other different ways of kind of reaching out to you and having more of a conversation, doing something different. So I appreciate you guys very much. Stay tuned for more, hopefully, here on wearechange.org.